Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again today, and welcome to Basic Nation Analysis Late Age Flegrei. Yes, that's right, I realized I never actually did this. I played a game as Late Age Flegrei. In fact, that's what we're in right now, the final turn of that game, Do You Even Lift? And I made an intro video about Late Age Flegrei back in the latter part of last year, but I never actually sat down and made the full Basic Nation analysis of them, so that's what I'm doing today. Late Age Flegrei has a lot of similarities to Middle Age Flegrei. It has some very, very important differences too, so this will be a little bit shorter than some of the Basic Nation analysis I've done, just because some things can be kind of referred to as the same as Middle Age Flegrei. Go watch that video. In any case, Late Age Flegrei is, I think, a very, very interesting nation. It's a nation that has very, very stark, very sharply defined strengths and weaknesses, which I always think is a great quality for a nation to have, and not every nation does. Like, there are some nations that are just kind of like they're decent, they're good at stuff, they can do things, which is fine, don't get me wrong, but it's not quite the same as being a distinctively strong nation in specific ways, which is what Late Age Flegrei is. Late Age Flegrei has these very, as I said, very sharply defined strengths and very sharply defined weaknesses. So let's talk about those. Obviously, in this game, I'm not going to talk about extent of expansion as much. I didn't sit down to go play out another year of expansion. In general, I would say expansion as Flegrei is a little bit more difficult than it is with a lot of late age nations. You have to kind of get lucky, because as late age Flegrei, you are hugely, hugely, hugely resource locked. Your basic units cost a lot of resources, and honestly, you don't get a huge amount of value for those extra resources. For example, Helot soldiers. Helot soldiers cost a few more resources than basic late-age heavy infantry, and they actually have less protection. That's because, for some reason, the plate cuirass in particular... Well, there's two reasons. First of all, they're wearing a super heavy helmet. Protection 21 on the head, so headshots, Helot soldiers do not fear. Also, the plate cuirass is actually kind of an inefficient piece of armor for some reason. Illwinter represents plate cuirasses as costing more resources than chainmail, which is not correct. I mean, I suppose you could say the resources represent only the weight of metal going into it, but plate cuirasses were generally easier to forge and simpler than most earlier forms of armor. That's why they kind of took over and were used so widely in the Anyway, the point is, Helot soldiers cost a lot of resources, particularly in comparison to the number of gold and recruitment points they cost. They're not exceptional units, but they do, of course, have the upgrade to Ironbound, which is pretty cool. Iron Guard, the upgraded version, essentially, of Ironbound / Helot soldiers. Very effective, actually. High protection, because they have... Their body protection goes from the plate cuirass to the plate hauberk. Lots of encumbrance, unfortunately. High skills is particularly attack skill. Their defense skill is unexceptional, but their attack skill is quite high, and high damage, because they have a higher than normal strength score. They do have the downside of being magic beings, but troop-wise, your basic units over here, these three, which are going to form the majority of your armies just because they're the easiest to recruit, you're stringently resource capped on them. You do have Helot crossbowmen. Helot crossbowmen also cost a lot of resources, and once again, that is the limiter on them. They cost 26 resources because, again, plate cuirass and full helmet. So they have a lot of armor. Unfortunately, in the age of crossbows, having a lot of armor on your crossbowmen is fairly unimportant. If these guys were naked or wearing, like, leather or something, if they were armored like the Helot archers are armored, and as such had a resource cost of, like, maybe 8 or 10, because crossbows cost resources, they'd be hugely better. Hugely better. As it is, they're merely pretty good. The benefit of all these slave soldiers, of course, is that their upkeep is very low, so you can mass large armies of them without paying a lot of money. The same is true of the Mouflon cataphract, and the Mouflon cataphract is, in my opinion, the best Phlegran unit. Now, let me pause here to note, this video is coming out one day after Das Tactic released his, how to play Late Age Flegrei video. I've watched that video. I do disagree with some of the things he says. That's not me saying that Das Tactic is a bad player or doing it wrong or whatever. That's just because I think his video is more aimed towards single player, and my videos are typically more aimed towards multiplayer and made with that kind of idea in mind. Multiplayer is a very different environment from single player. You have different priorities, and different things are valuable. So, in that sense, I mentioned this specifically because Das Tactic talked a lot about the Cyclops soldiers, and he used the Cyclops soldiers very heavily. I prefer not to use Cyclops soldiers. I don't like them for a variety of reasons that I'll get into, but basically, my opinion is that Cyclops soldiers should basically be ignored in most circumstances. Mouflon cataphracts, on the other hand, are extremely good. A couple of reasons. First of all, they are cheap for what they are. They're heavy cavalry, and for heavy cavalry, they are cheap. 30 gold, 39 recruitment points, so they cost fewer recruitment points, only slightly, but fewer recruitment points than standard heavy cavalry, and they cost like 10, 15 less gold than most heavy cavalry do. Only a little bit less gold than indie heavy cavalry, I suppose, but like, Savaran Guard costs way more gold than this. Barbarian Heavy Horse, I think, are slightly cheaper. Let's look at some heavy cavalry, shall we? Not Marignan. Marignan doesn't have any. Neither does Man. So you've got, like, the Barbarian Heavy Horsemen are cheaper, but they're also a lot lighter. They only have 15 prot. Ancestor Vessels are much more expensive, of course. 20 gold more expensive. Pangea has the Centaur Cataphracts. Centaur Cataphracts cost 5 more gold, and they cost a comparable amount of actually, no, they cost quite a bit fewer resources. That's always interesting. Centaurs are notoriously underpriced, partially for that reason. You have in Raga, of course, you have the Savaran Guard. Savaran Guard cost 10 more gold. Savaran Cataphracts cost 5 more gold and have much lighter armor, while costing close to the same resources. So, they're very comparable heavy cavalry. They're very similar to other people's heavy cavalry, while being not only cheaper to recruit in terms of gold, but also a lot cheaper in upkeep. Their upkeep is only 1 per turn, whereas most heavy cavalry have upkeep of like 2 or 3 per turn. Let's look back at, not Relay. Why am I clicking on Relay? Let's look back at those Savaran Cataphracts. Yeah, upkeep cost of over 2 gold per turn. So you can mass Mouflon Cataphracts without killing your economy in the way that you can't with other heavy cavalry. On top of that, their headbutt attack is more powerful than the hoof attacks that most cavalry have. Their broadsword hits quite hard. Their lance charge hits quite hard. And they provide supplies, which is nice. So you can form large armies of Mouflon Cataphracts, and they will feed themselves. You don't need food for them. They are, of course, slaves, but that actually means that your Taskmaster can buff their morale, so they can easily end up with the equivalent of base morale 11 or 12. In fact, if you have... So, Flegra Commanders will give them base morale 11. Oppressor Generals, however, will give them base morale 12 from this leadership bonus there, plus the Taskmaster plus 2 bonus. You can give him items that increase that value further. So you can have quite hardy Mouflon Cataphracts, high protection, decent skills, cheap to recruit, faster to recruit than most heavy cavalry, and they cost less to upkeep, so you will have more of them, and you will have more money than somebody else who's recruiting their heavy cavalry. And they're quite efficient. Cyclops soldiers, here's the main reason I don't like Cyclops soldiers, okay? There's 2 of them, actually. The first is limited recruitment. You can only recruit 3 per fort per turn, which is not much. I mean, in terms of squares they occupy on the battlefield, yeah, they occupy 3 squares, which is the equivalent of 9 infantry units. So in that sense, you could say they're comparable to your regular infantry, but they occupy those squares with only 1 body. It's 1 tough body. I mean, size 4, prot 19, they have the Cyclops spear they can repel with, and they repel pretty efficiently. So yeah, but it's still only 1 body. And that 1 body will take a lot of hits. On top of that, they have to be led by size 4 or more commanders, which means Cyclops commanders, Cyclops smiths, or Laestrygonian tyrants. Cyclops commanders are your worst commander, and they're also one of your most expensive. They're not a mage. They don't have anything they can do except lead armies. They only have leadership 60, so they can't use formations, and they don't have a morale bonus. They do have a Taskmaster bonus, so you can use these guys to lead armies if you want, but they cost 75 gold and 83 resources, when you could instead take a Phlegra commander for 45 gold and a lot fewer resources, which helps with the fact that you are constantly resource capped until quite late in the game. Or you could take a Phlegra Cataphract commander for only slightly more money and fewer resources, who is a Taskmaster +3 and can use formations. Or, probably more pertinently, you could take an Oppressor General who has 80 leadership, also has magic leadership, so he can lead your Iron Guard and Ironbound, and is a wizard, and can use formations. The Oppressor General is just so much better, it's not even funny. So recruiting Cyclops soldiers locks you into recruiting Cyclops commanders. Cyclops commanders are only really good for leading Cyclops soldiers, and Cyclops soldiers are easy to counter. In multiplayer, if you're fielding a ton of Cyclops soldiers, I mean, just to say, you can do this. You can field a lot of Cyclops soldiers. They may be the fastest way for late age Phlegra to expand, because they expand quite well against independents. That's fine. That's true. Okay. The downside is you'll end up with all these Cyclops commanders that you had to recruit that aren't very good, and sometimes Cyclops soldiers will still fail expansion, particularly if they start getting shot with a lot of crossbows. So, you know, there's ups and downs. You can do it. That's fine. But I'm not impressed by Cyclops soldiers, particularly once you get into the mid-game and mid-game magic starts coming out. Air elementals beat the shit out of Cyclops soldiers, like hands down, no problem. Thunderstrike communions destroy Cyclops soldiers very easily. Anyone casting Maws of the Earth destroys Cyclops soldiers. Anyone casting... they do have magic armor, so you can't just hit them with destruction to remove it, but a lot of mid-game magic absolutely dumpsters Cyclops soldiers, and because of the limited recruitment, because of the gold cost and the really high resource cost, Cyclops soldiers will come in limited quantities. So you're going to end up in this situation, I think, where you have these armies of Cyclops soldiers if you're leaning on them heavily, and they just start getting trash canned by magic, because basically, Cyclops soldiers are Meconian Gigante hoplites, but a little bit worse in every way. I'll say that again. Meconian hoplites, but a little bit worse. They have the javelin attack, which is actually really nice. It's very low accuracy, but in large battles, it will hit something, and it will tend to kill what it hits, because it's high piercing damage. But, like, their armor is a little bit worse than Mecone's hoplites. Their skills are a little bit worse than Mecone's hoplites. They actually have slightly more hit points, but they don't have formation fighters, so they can't come 2 per square. So their attack density is half that of Gigante hoplites. Like, if I had to pick, I would just straight up rather have Gigante hoplites than Cyclops soldiers. And I don't think that says anything good about them, because Gigante hoplites are already kind of marginal. And then finally you have the Iron Guard. We talked about Iron Guard. Iron Guard are really good. The Ironbound, so the thing to note about the Iron Guard and the Ironbound, the upgraded Helot soldiers, let me see, I think I have some around somewhere. Yes, the Ironbound. So Ironbound are worse versions of the Iron Guard. They have 1 fewer point in each of their skills, and otherwise they are the same. They have the heavier armor, the Prot 18 armor, the Plate Hauberk, and they have they have less strength, but they have higher attack skill and all that stuff. So the main thing, of course, is the 17 morale. Ironbound have fantastic morale, so do Iron Guard. They're magic beings who have to be commanded by mages. This is another reason why you want to use Oppressor Generals, because Oppressor Generals can lead these guys, and these guys are by far your best infantry. Compare Helot Soldier. This is actually an experienced Helot Soldier, so attack skill 11, defense skill 13, 15 prot, total attack of 12 with a damage of 16. Compared to an Ironbound, attack 12, defense 10, same experience bonus, so this is just a straight-up swap. He lost defense skill because his armor got heavier, but he gained a little bit of attack skill, and he gained prot. Overall, for a chaff unit, that's definitely a worthwhile trade. And so he hits more often, and he doesn't run, because morale 17 versus morale 10. Very, very much superior. So you want Ironbound, you want Iron Guard, you have to have mages to lead them. You cannot use Cyclops generals. Cyclops commanders cannot lead those guys. So you're going to be recruiting, eventually you're going to be recruiting a lot of Helot soldiers and crossbowmen, obviously to kind of form the meat of your armies, but your best single unit is the Mouflon cataphract. The Mouflon cataphract is fast. The Mouflon cataphract hits really hard because they have this lance charge right at the start, and this lance charge does up to 30 piercing damage, which means a Mouflon cataphract can slam into a Cyclops soldier or the equivalent and deal really, really serious damage. Like, what would it be? It would be, because we're subtracting 20%, so his protection would be 14 versus 30, an average of 16 damage on a lance strike. Pretty freaking solid. And the Cyclope would not be able to kill the Mouflon cataphract on the return strike most of the time, because prot 18 plus a pretty decent shield parry with 16 more prot that would get in the way. In any case, plus combat speed 18, these guys can flank around very effectively. You have water magic, you can cast quickness on them. Quickened Mouflon cataphracts are a thing of beauty. So, troop-wise, Mouflon cataphracts are the stars of the show. Heal-it soldiers, heal-it arch, heal-it crossbowmen, very solid. In this game, I ended up recruiting a lot of heal-it archers as well, just because I was, as I mentioned, so very, very resource-strapped. Even in this fort has 400 resources, which is unusually high. Even in this fort, I can't really crank out all that many heal-it soldiers, just because they are so heavily resource-capped. I could get my 3 Cyclops, I could do that. Or I could pump out, you know, a few Mouflon cataphracts. I actually end up rec point limited if I'm doing Mouflon cataphracts, because I took Turmoil 3 in order to maximize my infantry and crossbow recruitment. In hindsight, and especially after the patch, I don't necessarily recommend that anymore, specifically because it limits your Mouflons so sharply. If I was playing Late Age Flegrei again, I think I would probably go Turmoil 1 or maybe even Neutral, just because I want to be able to recruit 4 or 5 of these guys from every fort pretty much always. Like, in my capital even, I have not all that many recruitment points, 168, so I can only get 4. I would like to get that up quite a bit. If you take Order 3, you can actually end up recruiting 8 or 9 Mouflon cataphracts per turn if you have the resources, which I do. So that would be really nice. However, you can play Turmoil Flegrei. It's not much of a problem because, while these guys take a lot of rec points, not the Cyclops soldiers, these guys don't. So you can just, you know, you end up very, very hard resource capped very, very quickly. And if you wanted, like I said, you can mix in Cyclops. It just makes commanding your armies a pain in the ass, because now, like, these guys can all be led by a wizard, but these guys have to have their own special commander, and it's just sort of a bummer. In any case, mages. Let's talk about them. Shackled mages and Phlegra oppressors, literally the same as Middle-Age Flegra. Everything that I've said about Middle-Age Flegra applies directly to these guys. These guys are your bread and butter. They do very solid work, and they will provide most of your battle magic. Phlegra oppressors can cast all kinds of battle magic, and they can do it, of course, starting from turn 1 in the battle, because they are automatically in communion. That's really, really huge. I've talked about it a lot with Middle-Age Flegra. You all know how that works. It's good. That said, Late-Age Flegra doesn't use it as much, because, of course, Late-Age Flegra has other things to focus on. Oppressor Generals are really, really good as well. They're basically Phlegra Oppressors with slightly less flexibility, but they can all cast Earth spells, which are really important. And then you get these randoms. I would honestly be recruiting Oppressor Generals a lot of the time, because they're much more durable in combat since they have some armor on, and some defense skill, and a shield so they can parry arrows that are aimed at them. So these guys are, in my opinion, pretty good. Also, they're not automatically old. Some of them will be old, but they're not automatically old like the Phlegra Oppressors are. So much better overall, but a few Shackled Mages and several Oppressor Generals leading an army can be highly effective. You can keep the Phlegra Oppressors mostly at home to do research and bring them out when you really need the extra magical punch. Cyclope Commanders we talked about. You could potentially make them light thugs, since they do have heavy armor and decent skills, but usually I wouldn't really recruit them. Also, funnily enough, they don't wear shoes. None of the Cyclops wear shoes. Presumably their feet are too big. Cyclops Smiths, you definitely want these guys because, as I said, you're super resource limited. However, you do have the problem that with all of your capital-only stuff, you're sharply limited in how many you can end up recruiting, because, of course, the Laestrygonians will pop out, and you will want to recruit them. I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. Cyclops Smiths are expensive for their paths. 240 gold for 3 paths is not good value. But they come with a very strong giant chassis, so you can thug them if you want pretty effectively. They have Master Smith, and they have the resource bonus. The resource bonus is really valuable, actually. I don't have many of these guys. I only have 5. But they've still kicked my resources up by an extra 100 just by having the 5 of them standing around. Now, is it worth it? Their upkeep cost is quite high. Yes, it's worth it to have a number of these guys. They will do your forging. You can use them to ratchet up through boosters in order to forge like Staves of Elemental Mastery and all kinds of crazy shit in the late game. They're really, really good. They can forge you Rune Smashers for magic resistance negate spells. They can forge all of your thug gear. They're very, very good. You should definitely have some. That said, as I mentioned, your numbers are going to be somewhat limited because they're in competition with a couple of other things that are also hugely important to the nation. The first is the Oppressor Archon. The Oppressor Archon is a slow-to-recruit, broad-path Rainbow Mage. Starts off with 5 paths at 1, gets 2 randoms. You're guaranteed to have Fire or Earth 2. You might have Fire 3 or Earth 3, and then you might also have Air 2 or Astral 2. Mainly, there's 3 things that Oppressor Archons are good for, and one of them is really dangerous. The first is forging. Oppressor Archons are your only astral forging, and they are also your astral earth crosspath forging, so they can forge astral boosters. You can potentially ratchet yourself up to astral 4 this way. The second is sight searching. Sight searching is hugely important because you need some astral income. The forging thing, as I mentioned, they're your only source of astral forging. That includes amulets of anti-magic, which you will desperately, desperately want for your Laestrygonian tyrants. That said, the third is possibly the most important use and also the most dangerous. And I never really did it, specifically because I didn't really feel like I needed it at any point, and I was very scared of losing Oppressor Archons doing it. The third is casting anti-magic and other astral spells in battle. That's really dangerous because Oppressor Archons are your only astral mages, and you will not have many. So, if the enemy is any good at all, if you try to use an Oppressor Archon in combat, they will, magic duel them, or target them with something else. They will deliberately target the Oppressor Archon and kill it as quickly as possible, because that puts you out a lot of gold, a significant amount of capital recruitment time, which you need for other things, and it prevents you from using anti-magic or similar buff spells on that army. Until you get Army of Lead, anti-magic is really valuable, because your magic resistance is not great, and you field large armies of chaff. So, it's important to get that kind of support. And it's hard to get. I mean, middle-aged Flegrei can't get it, and just has to kind of fucking suffer. As a late-age Flegrei, you can get it, but it's dangerous. Generally speaking, I would say Oppressor Archons probably shouldn't be in combat, they should probably be at home. So I have, in this game, they wandered around sight searching. I sight searched everything up to level 2 Astral that I could. Ended up with, I think, if I recall correctly, almost no Astral income still. Yeah, literally no Astral income. But, that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And, yeah, forging is the most valuable use for them. Amulets of anti-magic in particular, and other astral and cross-path items as the need arises. But most of your cross-path forging that isn't astral will be done by Cyclops smiths. Also, funnily enough, Cyclops smiths, they lost 2 paths from the Middle Age, and they only lost 60 gold in price, or 90... They didn't lose much in price, which is sort of hilarious. Master smiths, Cyclope Master smiths, or Cyclope elders, whatever they were called, were not all that much more expensive and much more powerful. Particularly, they had guaranteed air. And anyway, it's just kind of funny that Cyclope smiths are so much not special. And then, of course, you have the Laestrygonian Tyrant, the best supercombatant in the game. Not entirely because of its raw stats, although its raw stats are very, very good for a supercombatant, and its paths are incredibly good for a supercombatant, but also just because it's one of the few recruitable ones that really stands muster. A Laestrygonian Tyrant will beat any other recruitable supercombatant into the dirt. Melkarts? No. Destroyed. Fomorian Kings? Nope. Destroyed. Nephil Jarls? Nope. Destroyed. Adons? Destroyed. There is no recruitable that can compete with a Laestrygonian Tyrant. There's also no recruitable that can compete with a Laestrygonian Tyrant in price, so there is that. And this really kind of shapes the nation once they arrive. These guys have a chance to arrive on turn 15, and a larger chance every turn thereafter. When they arrive, your capital site explodes. Your capital site originally causes heat and gives you 3 fire gems per turn. Once it explodes into the shattered volcano, it gives you 1 fire and 1 death, and the process kills a lot of your capital population, like 10,000 if I recall. About a third of your capital population dies in the process, so it cuts your income significantly. It causes a bunch of unrest, which also cuts your income significantly. And it lets you recruit these bad boys, which are hugely expensive. Totally worth it. Super worth it. Absolutely worth it. I would make that trade with every nation in the game if I could. Laestrygonian Tyrants are just that powerful. They have the perfect combination of traits for someone to walk up into an army and say, fuck you, I win. They berserk, so they'll never rout. They recuperate, so they heal their own afflictions. They cause fear, so people don't want to stay and fight them. They have the paths of immortality. Death for Soul Vortex, Earth for protective buffs, Fire for Phoenix Pyre. They have full slots, so you can slap all the gear you could ever want on them except for feet. They do not have feet slots. The snakes cannot wear boots, sadly. And they have a bajillion attacks. Great Club, 2 serpent legs, 5 attacks from their hair, and a ranged attack if they want. But so, in melee, I want to emphasize this, because this, I think, is something that sometimes gets overlooked. In melee, with no weaponry whatsoever, a Laestrygonian Tyrant has 8 attacks. Now, 5 of them can only target the same person. But still, 8 attacks. This is why the Laestrygonian Tyrant beats other supercombatants, because with those 8 attacks, he automatically inflicts a huge defense skill penalty, and then he starts to actually score hits. And when he scores hits, he's so monstrously strong that he crushes whoever it is he's attacking. The serpent legs also inflict poison, and the snake tresses are magical and inflict poison. So he'll also rack up a ton of poison damage on whoever he's fighting. So in a thug versus thug fight, the Tyrant is almost always going to win, assuming he's been scripted and geared appropriately. You can still take them out with surprise counter thugs. If you have a teleporting counter thug that's geared specifically to kill a Tyrant, or something like that, you can do it. But the process requires making a counter supercombatant that is just as expensive as the Tyrant, if not more so. Lucid and I have both done videos on creating and countering thugs and supercombatants. Lucid, I think, if I recall correctly, Lucid had a video specifically with him countering Laestrygonian Tyrant builds that I had given him. And yeah, they can be stopped, but they can only be stopped by very, very expensive counter builds, and which have to catch them by surprise. If they're not specifically geared to counter a thing, they can be stopped by that thing, but usually they should be. The biggest weakness of the Laestrygonian Tyrant is its map move, and its lack of feet. The Tyrant cannot wear Boots of the Messenger, so it can't have the easy way of speeding itself up. Its map move is unimpressive. You can fix this to some extent by using other items, but those items are hard for Flegrei to access. For example, the Flying Carpet is an option, but the Flying Carpet requires pretty high paths and a lot of air gems to forge, so Laestrygonian Tyrants usually won't get them. Also, it occupies a miscellaneous slot, which the Tyrant wants to fill up with other items. But in general, Laestrygonian Tyrants are thug killers, they are army killers, they're everything killers. They just need to be geared appropriately. And that's a very complicated subject that I'm not going to take a whole video to talk about. But in general, therefore, late-age Phlegrin's strategy is split into 2 parts. There's before the Tyrants, and there's after the Tyrants. Before the Tyrants, your armies are basically these 3 units here, and the upgraded version of Heelot soldiers. You may have Iron Guard mixed in, you may have Cyclops soldiers mixed in, you may have Heelot archers instead of crossbows if you need to save resources. You can cast flaming arrows to make the Heelot archers pretty good, and to be honest, I would say that's quite a solid strategy, actually. Instead of recruiting fewer crossbows, spam out archers, save your resources for soldiers and cataphracts, and then just cast flaming arrows on the archers. You want to research enchantment anyway, so that's not a hard sell. And that makes your archers, pretty close to as good as crossbows, because now they're launching armor-piercing attacks, just like the crossbowmen. They aren't as damaging, but they can still punch through most standard armor just fine. So, these units here are going to be most of your armies. You're going to try and field large armies of basically chaff. You're going to be using your communion battle magic, but early in the game, you're not actually going to be using much magic. You're going to be researching really, really hard, because once the Tyrants come out, the game changes, and you need to have research online at that point. In order for the Tyrants to be most effective, you need Construction 6, Alteration 7, Thaumaturgy 3. Thaumaturgy 3 gives you Iron Will, Alteration gives you the Earth buffs, Alteration 7 specifically gives you Phoenix Pyre, and level 6 gives you Soul Vortex. Those are the spells that make Tyrants immortal. Construction 6 is what you need to forge the gear that lets Tyrants be immortal. You can get away with Construction level 4, but basically hitting those paths right there, Thaumaturgy 3, Alteration 7, Construction 6, vital target. Early in the game, you should probably research Enchantment. Enchantment 4 is a huge boost to the abilities of your armies. It gives you Strength of Giants, it gives you Flaming Arrows. As you work your way up Construction, towards getting Construction 6, you will hit Legions of Steel, which is great to drop on your troops with your various Earth Mages. Alteration also gives you some very good Earth combat magic, including Destruction, Maws of the Earth in particular. Maws of the Earth is a very good one. And then as you go up, it gives you Marble Warriors, and eventually the Army of Gold or Army of Lead spells. All of those are great for you. Having some Conjuration is a good idea, but it's not your first priority. Conjuration you basically want for Conjuration 3, Summon Earth Power, and Phoenix Power. Beyond that, not very important. You can research Evocation, but you really don't need to. Things that are good for you in Evocation if you want. Sulfur Haze. Sulfur Haze used to be not very great, but it got a lot better once Illwinter changed clouds to proc 3 times as fast as they did. So now, Sulfur Haze does a ton of fatigue damage very quickly, and it also racks up a ton of armor negating damage, because it does armor negating, fire, or poison damage 3 times a round. So in the time that it takes someone to attack once, Sulfur Haze will proc 3 times. It has a pretty wide area of effect. It lingers for so many times, and it causes a lot of damage. I think this is effectively actually lingering 12 nowadays, because clouds got buffed in that way. So Sulfur Haze is very powerful. You can spam it very rapidly. Your mages can throw Acid Bolt. They cannot cast Freezing Mist, which is the water variant of Sulfur Haze that does armor negating cold damage, because you never get the water-air crosspath except on Cyclope mages. But they can throw Blade Wind against lightly armored troops, Earthquake, Falling Fires, all that kind of stuff. There's lots of good stuff in Evocation, and Middle-Aged Phlegra loves the Evocation school and should research it very early. They also love Conjuration, because Trophimos Sages can summon Elementals with Conjuration level 5, which is very useful. Late-Age Phlegra? Nah, Alteration is the Late-Age Phlegra school. Alteration and Construction, because once those Tyrants come out, the Tyrants can do a lot of the work for you. You saw me use Tyrants in this game, in Do You Even Lift, and they are monstrously powerful. I lost 1 or 2. I lost a couple. I lost Hoplodamos. Actually, I think Hoplodamos might have been the only one I lost. I think he was. But yeah, Laestrygonian Tyrants are just incredibly powerful. And it's hard to say no to this kind of thing. I mean, look at Genocidicles here. He's got a 3rd eye, so he's got increased magic resistance, which is hilarious. His base magic resistance is 24 with the gear he's got on. His base protection is 28. His head prot is his lowest at 21, but most people can't even hit him in the head. He regenerates 9 hit points a round. He's practically invincible, and he hasn't even cast his buffs. Once he casts his buffs, he's pretty much actually invincible. Iron Will, Earth Power. Yeah, he becomes extremely difficult to kill. You have to deploy very specialized countermeasures to stop this kind of thing. This is probably a good standard gearing for fighting armies. He's got the Vine Shield to stop people from attacking him. He's got the Firebrand, so he hits a whole square at a time. This cuts down on his number of attacks, actually, slightly. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. It removes the Great Club, which it actually does a little bit less damage than. And it removes the Boulder, but nobody cares about the Boulder, and the Club is replaced by a better weapon. Crown of Lead, to increase his magic resistance, and because it's fairly cheap. Armor of Knights, because it's cheap. Amulet of Anti-Magic, because you always need more magic resistance, and Ring of Regeneration. This kit will see you through most fights. Once you have Alteration 7, a standard army that is designed to fight another army cannot defeat a Laestrygonian Tyrant geared this way. You have to deploy very specialized countermeasures. And that's the good thing about supercombatants. They force your opponent to account for them. They force your opponents to deploy specific countermeasures that you can then plan around. And Flegra really, really, really uses them heavily. So you can see here, this is what my armies basically looked like. I had a lot of Heelot soldiers. I had a lot of Heelot archers. I was casting a lot of Maws of the Earth. I had some battle communions backing up my troops, but mainly, like, almost a strict majority of my resources at this point were going into Laestrygonian Tyrants. I had one active there. I had, of course, two over here, Enceladus and Clytius. I had a fourth Mimos down here in Trensibor. I had a fifth in Strongdeal, Calicolon. So that was 5. I had lost one Hoplodamos. That's 6. That's 12 turns. I didn't get them until slightly after turn 20. I might have lost another one in the process there somewhere. I think I might have lost a second, but in any case, point being, 2, 3, 4. Well, yeah, so, you know, I was making very, very heavy use of them, and I think that's the proper strategy. I think that's the way to do it with Late Age Flegra. Now, in this game, obviously, I got kind of hosed by terrain. I got trapped in that inconclusive war with Ulm that, honestly, I should have pulled out of a lot earlier and gone and fought somebody else. I got caught in this war with Pangea, where I didn't make progress quite fast enough. But overall, I performed okay. My biggest issue was just that I didn't recognize the rush was happening fast enough to stop it. If I'd realized a turn or two earlier what Perun was doing, I could have stopped him, because his army there could not have defeated Mimos. Mimos was highly elementally resistant, and I had Hoplodamos coming over here with the Ring of Frost to make him immune to Frozen Heart, plus a couple of weapons and an Armor of Knights. Armor of Knights actually doesn't matter since he's wearing a Shroud, but the Shroud gives him extra regeneration, so that's fine. So yeah, Hoplodamos giving that gear to Mimos would have made Mimos basically invincible to this army. He would have been able to plow right through it without too much of a problem, and yeah, would have stopped Perun from winning. At that point, I think the tides would have turned a little bit, because I actually had quite a bit of territory. It doesn't really look it, especially because my income is so low, but that's because my territory's income was very low. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, about to be 27, 28, although currently under siege. This large army, once again, would be wiped out by Calicolon without much problem. Like, without much problem at all. And, yeah, I would have been able to push out in multiple directions once again. But in any case, I lost this game fair and square, but it wasn't because of Flegra. It was because of my own diplomatic failings. Flegra as a nation, very solid. The Laestrygonians are really the stars of the show in a way that even the middle-aged Phlegran tyrants are not. And everything else in the nation kind of ends up subordinated to them, strategically speaking, which is very, very interesting. I think you can work hard to strike a little bit more of a balance. Focus more on the Iron Guard, perhaps, recruiting from your capital. Focus more on massing Mouflon cataphracts, which I did not do much of in this game. It should be noted that this game started, of course, before the fix, where these guys actually cost 61 resources each instead of 47, which hampered their recruitment quite a bit, and which inspired me to take Turmoil 3. As I said, I normally wouldn't do that these days. I think Flegra actually wants maybe Turmoil 1, but overall not much Turmoil, because being able to recruit Mouflon cataphracts and Iron Guard a little bit more heavily, very, very useful. In terms of god choice, N7E4 Dracon is fine, more expensive now than it used to be. It used to be fairly cheap, but now it's 50 points more expensive. We can actually hop out here and go into the Pretender Design screen real quick. I think there's basically two strategies for Late Age Flegra. You either take an Expander with no Bless and don't use Shrouds for your Laestrygonians, or you take an Immobile with a heavy Bless and use Shrouds. probably it's better to take scales and not use shrouds. So for that, expanding monster-wise, probably the bulls or the Myrmecolion are the best choice. Dracon is very good, but costs you a couple extra scales. But you could do a Myrmecolion here with like Earth 6 hard skin. That'll be enough to expand, barring very, very bad luck. And then you could take Heat 3. This doesn't actually hurt you so much because your capital is already high heat. Production 3, Turmoil 1, Growth 3. That's fine. If you wanted, you could dump some Misfortune for some magic. But I think this would work just perfectly well for you. You could take a Great White Bull. He doesn't even need hard skin, since he's quite an effective trampler. That'll get you an extra scale. I would recommend probably taking Nature 2 if you're taking Nature at all. There you go. You do want Nature because you want to be able to search for and forge Nature items. Having a god with at least Nature 2 does jumpstart that process, so that's an argument in favor of taking a Bull over a Myrmecolion. You can always find Nature independence, but it's not 100% reliable, and usually they're only Nature 1. Finding Nature 2 is difficult, and without Nature 2, you cannot forge Rings of Regeneration, and you cannot forge Vine Shields. And those two are both very, very important pieces of Thug Kit, which I would definitely recommend you at least consider using. You don't always have to, especially the Vine Shield. The Vine Shield can be replaced by other things. Notably, the Shield of Gleaming Gold is very good for Laestrygonian Tyrants, since they already have a high fear level. And the Awe and Fear synergize very well. So, and of course, Dracon. Dracon is very much a viable option. I would probably do this nowadays instead of Nature 7, just because Nature 7 is very expensive. It'll cost you like 3 extra scales over Nature 4. Probably go Nature 4 or maybe even just Nature 2. If you go Nature 2, then you can do this. You have 18 points left, which is, you can go Nature 3 without costing yourself anything. Just take an Unbreakable Bless, which will make your Dracon less likely to take afflictions while expanding. And this gives you pretty decent scales. Slight income penalty, but not too bad, especially because this will come down during the winter, the autumn and winter. Maximized growth, maximized production, and you're only slightly negative on recruitment points, so you should be able to recruit decent numbers of Mouflon Cataphracts and Iron Guard, assuming your capital doesn't land in a terrible spot. So, strategically speaking, that's probably the way I would go. Dracon or Bull. Now, one other interesting thing to note that I think a lot of people haven't really talked about much with Phlegra. Phlegran priests have this reduces unrest ability. This actually happens very early in the turn resolution order. Like, it happens before patrolling, and it happens before income is calculated, and it happens before blood hunting. So, the main limiter on blood hunting is how much unrest you cause in the province and how many people have to be killed by patrolling in order to bring that unrest down. That's why blood hunting provinces, their population drops, because the patrollers are killing people in order to bring the unrest down. But like I said, this happens before patrolling or blood hunting. It even happens before income. So, if you do manage to get blood mages somehow, as late age Phlegra, Phlegran priests are fantastic. Because Phlegran priests, you can stack them up in a province. They're cheap. They only cost 1 commander point, 65 gold. You can stack them up in a province that you're blood hunting, and they will, if you have 5 or 6 or 10 of them in that province, and their upkeep is also very low because they are holy. So if you have 10 of these guys in a province, they cut the unrest by 20 before anything happens. So actually, I'm sorry, it actually happens after blood hunting, but before... No, it happens before blood hunting. Yeah, that's right. So they cut the unrest by 20, which means your income is higher, so you get more money out of the province than you would think. And your blood hunters have a higher chance of success, and your patrollers kill fewer people, so the province lasts longer. Flegrei, if they had a blood mage, would be amazing solely because of this unit. As it is, they don't have a blood mage, so Phlegran priests can't really be used to their full extent in that way. But even so, Phlegran priests are very worthwhile just for keeping around to stop the unrest that your tyrants generate just by wandering around. Because your tyrants generate 10 unrest in every province they're in at the end of every turn. If you have 5 priests in that province, then people don't care. You know, enough priests make people not care about the giant snake legs eating their friends. Look, man, it's canonical. That's how Dominions works. If you have enough priests talking, they completely drown out the screams. That's all I have to say about it. In any case, that's Late Age Flegra. It's a very interesting nation. It's a nation... how do I put it? The troops are actually not the strong point. Like, there are some cool troops. Mouflon cataphracts are fairly efficient, which is nice. Iron Guard and Iron Bound are pretty decent chaff, which is nice because they have that really, really high morale. But these troops, completely unexceptional, basically. Helot Crossbowmen, their saving grace is that their upkeep is really low, which is really nice because you can mass up tons and tons of them. Helot Archers, same thing, but overall, for the late age, these guys are not impressive. They don't have to be impressive, because the nation is not about the troops. The nation is about the Laestrygonians, and everything else kind of is in a supporting role to those supercombatants. So it's a fascinatingly different strategy than most nations, where if you have access to thugs or supercombatants at all, they serve as support for your armies and your mages. Flegra has it the other way around. Your armies and your mages are support for your supercombatants, and the supercombatants, if used carefully and well, are what win you battles. So, I don't know. I like them. I think I like middle-age Flegra a little bit better, actually. Middle-age Flegra is a little better balanced, I think, in the sense that they have supercombatants that are quite effective. Phlegran Tyrants are still quite efficient supercombatants. They're a lot cheaper. And Phlegran armies and mages are more important. So you have these Elder Cyclops who have a lot more paths than Cyclops Smiths. Actually, wow, that's 3 more paths. Yikes. Yeah, 3 more paths for 90 more gold. Ouch. But so the Phlegran Tyrants are really good, but the Phlegran Tyrants have support elements as well as combat elements. So you can use them as super combatants, but you can also use them to spawn Helot warriors. And Helot warriors are very, very efficient for their price. Gigante warriors aren't bad troops, and you can recruit them. They serve as very, very efficient blockers because they berserk, they have high protection, and they have high hit points, so they can just stand in the way all day, every day. Cyclops warriors, very efficient siege chaff. Helot archers in the Middle Age, especially with flaming arrow support, very good. Your mages are more effective in the Middle Age. For one thing, you have national nature mages, which is kind of cool. For another thing, you have the Trophimos sages, which can, do all sorts of basic magic combat stuff and do your research for you for relatively cheap. So it's a different kind of nation. It's a little bit more balanced, I would say. It doesn't have astral magic. It has some important limitations, but it's not as heavily geared towards supercombatants and supporting elements as Late Age Flegra is. But like I said, I like Late Age Flegra. I like the playstyle. I think it's a lot of fun. It's very unique. It's very different from almost every other nation. But in any case, I've rambled on long enough. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I like them. I like the Giants. I really wish, and I've said this before, that Makone was as interesting and as effective at doing what it's trying to do as the later incarnations are. But it's just not. I mean, that's the way it is. It's just not as good. And it's really kind of tragic, because it has all the pieces, they're just not quite put together right. And the various downsides that it has associated with it really drag it down. Like, I don't know. Anyway, I'll get more into that later, but this has been Late Age Flegra. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video.